President Trump called me to tell me he is, quote, pissed off with Russia's President Putin and threatened to impose secondary tariffs on Russia's oil. Quote, if Russia and I are unable to make a deal on stopping the bloodshed in Ukraine, and if I think it was Russia's fault, which it might not be, but if I think it was Russia's fault, I am going to put secondary tariffs on all oil coming out of Russia. Mr. Trump said 25% tariffs on Russian oil could happen any moment and told me he plans to speak with President Putin this week. The president told me, quote, I was very angry, pissed off when Putin started getting into Zelensky's credibility and started talking about new leadership in Ukraine.
Donald Trump says he's pissed off at his hero, Vladimir Putin, when he started getting into Zelensky's credibility and started talking about new leadership in Ukraine. Getting into Zelensky's credibility. What do you mean, like this?
Today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. Biden and Kamala allowed this to happen by feeding Zelensky money and munitions like no country has ever seen before. Every time he came to our country, he'd walk away with $60 billion. He's probably the greatest salesman on earth. Russia wants to do something. They want to stop the savage barbarianism. I mean, what's going on over there? It's soldiers are being killed by the thousands on a weekly basis. It's ridiculous. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. It's back to you. Far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once?
A lot of times.
No, in this
even
entire
today.
meeting, you said thank
even
you.
Today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October.
He said Zelensky should have ended it, should have never started it. He's the greatest salesman on earth. Oh, and Russia wants to stop the savage and barbarianism. All that before yelling at him in front of cameras so that everyone knew who he's siding with. But don't forget what else has Trump supposedly pissed off at Putin. The fact that he's talking about new leadership in Ukraine. Yeah, I think you guys know where this is going.
Many of these European countries, and Zelensky himself, who claimed to be standing and fighting for the cause of freedom and democracy, when we actually look at what's happening in reality in these countries, as well as with Zelensky's government in Ukraine, is the exact opposite. You have the canceling of elections in Ukraine. You have political parties being silenced or even criminalized or thrown in prison.
Are you freezing out President Zelensky of this process a bit? Isn't there a danger of that?
No, I don't think so, as long as he's there. But, you know, at some point you're going to have elections, too. You're going to have an election.
So it really begs the question, as Vice President Vance said again in Munich, it's clear that they're standing against Putin. Obviously, that's clear. But what are they actually really fighting for? And are they aligned with the values that they claim to hold in agreement with us, the values that President Trump and Vice President Vance are standing for? And those are the values of freedom, of peace, and true security.
Is this phone call with Kristen Welker supposed to be another phase in what Trump thinks is the art of the deal? Because in reality, the ploy that he's growing a spine and suddenly has some tough words for Putin is the game that he's playing. I mean, look at how petrified and detached from reality his nominee for Deputy Secretary of Defense was when asked the simplest question about the war in Ukraine last month.
Can you tell me if Russia invaded Ukraine? Mr. Feinberg? I mean, Mr. Hexet said it.
Yeah, I understand.
It's easy, yes or no. Did they invade Ukraine?
I don't feel that I should publicly comment in the middle of a tense negotiation when I'm not privy to the facts to undermine what potentially...
You're not privy to the fact whether or not Russia invaded Ukraine and started a war that's lasted for 3 years?
I'm not privy to the details of what's going on in the negotiation between Russia and Ukraine, what the sensitivities are, what the president's trying to accomplish. So I'd be afraid to speak out of turn and undermine that. I do have confidence the president is very skillful at this, and he'll find the right way to help.
Scared shitless, afraid of what simply stating the facts would do to his nomination from a president that communicates in blatant lies on everything that he talks about. It wasn't embarrassing enough for him, though, because he went and did it again.
The SecDef a few days ago said, when asked whether or not Russia invaded Ukraine, he said it's complicated. It's not complicated. Russia did, in fact, invade our ally, Ukraine. Mr. Feinberg, did Russia invade Ukraine?
Well, going to my behind closed doors statement a second ago, I'll just say this.
They moved tanks and troops and armored personnel carriers across the Ukrainian border. It's a pretty simple question.
Yeah. Well, here's how, if I may, I'd like to
If
say,
you would ask the chairman of this committee if Russia invaded Ukraine, I'm pretty sure, the Republican chairman, I'm pretty sure I would know the answer.
I got you. However, there's a very tense negotiation going on now. It's important for American interests. I don't have
Mr. Feinberg, we've got to live in the real world here.
Yeah, but I don't.
I mean, things happen, and it's obvious to the rest of the world. And I think it's obvious to Europe right now that we just blew up an alliance. And for us not to be able to say an obvious fact it doesn't help a negotiation.
Well, what I was trying to say, Senator, is I don't think some person who's not informed on this, not involved in discussions, should make statements public that could undermine what the president and the secretary's intent is. I do have confidence that President Trump is very strong at negotiation, has a plan, and that he will find a good outcome.
Russia did, in fact, invade Ukraine 3 years ago. I know, Mr. Feinberg, I know you pay attention to the news, and I imagine if I asked you this question 3 years ago, I'm pretty sure I know what the answer would be.
Senator Mark Kelly there is the one in that exchange that Elon Musk later called a traitor. And unsurprisingly, Stephen Feinberg was confirmed as Deputy Secretary of Defense with 6 Democrats voting for him. Alyssa Slotkin, Jean Shaheen, John Fetterman, Jack Reed, Tim Kaine, and Mark Warner. So while these guys added their names to the list of senators that believe a billionaire like that guy should be in place to back up whatever Donald Trump says, despite reality, we're supposed to believe that the president is actually pissed at Vladimir Putin for doing everything his detractors said that he's doing. But he's not confused, and he's not even being played, because he admires him and doesn't like the fact that too many people are now paying attention to just how much of their goals match up. But for some reason, MAGA can't figure out who the traitor actually is.
Said this is genius. Putin declares a big portion of the Ukraine. Putin declares it as independent. Oh, that's wonderful. So Putin is now saying it's independent, a large section of Ukraine. I said, how smart is that? And he's going to go in and be a peacekeeper. That's the strongest peace force. We could use that on our southern border. That's the strongest peace force I've ever seen. There were more army tanks than I've ever seen. They're going to keep peace all right.
Just now, President Putin denied having anything to do with the election interference in 2016. Every U.S. intelligence agency has concluded that Russia did. My first question for you, sir, is who do you believe?
My people came to me, Dan Coates came to me, and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be. So I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today.